All right, everyone. So let's talk about yet another example of Mediterranean people hating each other. I've talked about the Roman-Jewish War. I've talked about Lebanese people and Palestinians killing each other back in the 70s and in the 80s. And I've talked about Sabra and Shatila and all that, all the horrific bloodshed that went along, that took place in that conflict. And I've also talked about the Macedonians and the Greeks hating each other, and the Macedonians are like, Alexander the Great was Macedonian, and the Greeks are like, don't ever call him Macedonian. Alexander the Great was Macedonian, but Macedonia originally was Thessaloniki, Agamenos, Kaperos, Keros, don't you understand, you stupid Bulgarian. Bulgarians are like, no, he belonged to this land. Real Macedonia is in Bulgaria. And the Greeks are like, listen, we will be very, very angry with you, and we will cause a very, very long clash within NATO. You do not call it Macedonia. All right, we will call it North Macedonia. North Macedonia, that's right. And Alexander the Great belonged to Macedonia. Don't ever forget it. Anyway. Yeah, Mediterranean people hating each other, right? What's there to be surprised about? And now we're talking about tensions between the Greeks and the Russians. Why am I not surprised? Why? Not shocking whatsoever. None of this is shocking, okay? None of this, because you have territorial disputes over islands, and if they could just start killing each other right now, they would not hesitate. There is no doubt in my mind about this. If there ever comes an opportunity, which there will be an opportunity, but if there ever comes an opportunity for them to spill each other's blood over territory and and their roots and their ethnic pride, then they will do it 100%. It will happen 100%. And the Greeks have a big old border wall right between themselves and Turkey. It's right in between Greece and a region called Adrianople, or Edirne. And Edirne borders with Greece, and it also borders with Bulgaria. And the Bulgarians have a long history there, and there is a substantial Bulgarian population there. At one point in time, Adrianople, or Edirne, belonged to the Greeks. The Greeks took it from the Turks in the First Balkan War, and the Turks in the 1920s had a war with the Greeks. This was after World War I, and the Turks took Edirne, or Adrianople, from the Greeks. And so the Greeks got a big old border wall right in between themselves and Adrianople, and it's about 40 kilometers long. Well, the Greeks want to triple the size of this wall. They want to make it 120 kilometers, and they're asking for EU funds. And meanwhile, the Turks and the Greeks are arguing over the islands of the Aegean Sea. They're arguing over and I'm not sure how you pronounce this, Dodecanese or Dodecanese islands. These are islands like Rhodes, etc. And the Turks are mad because the Greeks are putting in a lot of a military presence on those islands. They're putting a lot of soldiers on those islands, and the Turks are like, stop putting soldiers on the islands. And the Greeks are like, this is Greece, shut the hell up, we don't really care about your objections. And the Turks are like, NATO, stop this now. This must stop. And yeah, and of course, there's a whole bunch of history behind this. And anytime you get into a territorial dispute between two peoples, especially Mediterranean peoples, or Balkan peoples, Mediterranean peoples, they're always going to go back to history, and they're not just going to go back to the 1970s, because remember, it was only in the 1970s that the Greeks and the Turks had a war over Cyprus, and half of Cyprus now belongs to the Turks. So these people were killing each other just decades ago, within recent decades. Wasn't that long ago. So obviously they're going to fight each other again. This is very obvious. And they always go back to history, and they go past recent history. They go into the medieval period. And I've always seen this with Eastern peoples. Armenians and Azeris will do this. Ukrainians and Russians will do this. Ukraine used to belong to Russia, Kievan Rus. And then the Ukrainians come out and they're like, Russians say borscht belongs to Russia. No, borscht originally Ukrainian. It goes back to Kiev. That's the original land of the borscht. And they'll start killing each other over that. And they will, like, Eastern peoples will fight over a letter. I'm not exaggerating this. They will fight over alphabets and texts and scripts and all of these things. Like, I was reading about this yesterday. I was reading about controversies between ethnic Poles and Lithuanians living in Lithuania. I didn't know this until recently. There's a very large ethnic Polish population in Lithuania. Very fascinating. And what makes these Polish people so interesting is that they are very pro-Russia. I didn't know this, but some guy in Poland sent me an article about this, and I read it. I couldn't believe it. It's like, wow, there's a large population of Poles in Lithuania, and they're pro-Russia because the Lithuanians discriminate against them, and the Russians come and say, we support the Polish people. And so the Poles say, hey, we have more of a... we get more friendliness from the Russians than we do our own Lithuanian government. But Lithuanians and Poles have tensions in Lithuania. And the Lithuanians, they want Polish people's IDs. They want the names on Polish people's IDs to be spelled with in the Lithuanian style. And so, for example, there's a region in Lithuania called Vilno. And I think the Lithuanians, they call it Vilnius, and instead of using a W, they use a V. The Poles use a V; they call it Vilno. And the Lithuanians say, well, all these Polish people have W's in their names. They're fighting over the freaking W. They're like, let's see, Mr. Mateusz Żyrzalicki, you have a lot of Z's and a lot of W's here, but you got a lot of Z's here, but the W, that's the crime, guys. I'm seeing a lot of S's, a lot of Z's, but too many W's. Too many W's. That's got to go. That has got to go. All right, Mr. Kaczynski? They argue over letters. Croats and Serbs will get mad over different scripts, like, this is Croatia, do not put any Cyrillic script, no, look like Russia, no, not going to happen, no, impossible. This letter, Cyrillic alphabet, from Satan, from hell, I tell you, from the infernal, I tell you, it is from hell. Like, they will argue over all this stuff. Palestinians have stuff like this. Like they will argue over all sorts of things. Did Alexander? We're talking about Alec freaking Xander, the freaking great, for crying out loud, arguing over whether or not he was Greek or Macedonian. Was he Slavic or was he Greek? Did he come from the birth canal of a Slavic woman or a Greek woman? It's like. And it's like, dude, Alexander, you guys are arguing over an ancient pagan homosexual king who lived thousands of years ago. Like, I don't know what. It's amazing. Like, see, I can totally see why Americans don't focus so much on ancient history. Because I guess Americans a long time ago, they realized, like, Europeans... Because, Americans, like most of the American people's ancestors came from Europe, right? And so I guess at one point in time, Americans, when they built their country, they want it to be different from Europe, right? Like, we don't play cricket, we play baseball, etc. We don't drink tea, we drink coffee. We don't have kings, we have, Congress. And, like, we have our own system. Like, they have metric system, we have inches and cups and pounds and all that stuff. America has always wanted to be different from Europe, right? This is one of the things that made America unique. And I guess the Americans look to the Europeans and they're like, they always focus on the past. Like, Americans don't focus so much on the past. And that has its negatives, but it has its pros as well. The negative is that Americans will forget recent history that was pretty atrocious and act as if it never happened. Like, for example, a lot of Americans revere the Japanese, but when we talk about the problems in Japan, Americans like ultra-nationalism and all that. Most Americans don't really give a damn. That's the con, right? That's the negative. The pro to it is that Americans don't get into stupid squabbles like, was Alexander the Great Macedonian or Greek? Yeah. But they get into these things like history from thousands of years ago. But the Turks and the Greeks, they still hate each other. Not surprising. And I think eventually there's going to be a war between the Turks and the Greeks. And it's very interesting because we talk about whether or not NATO is going to exist, right? This is a big topic amongst people who are into geopolitics, right? Is NATO going to exist? And I think it's quite possible that NATO is going to disintegrate in the future, like the League of Nations in the past. Could it just transform into something else? That's also possible. But is NATO going to remain the same as it is? I don't think so. I think it's very likely that NATO is at least going to disintegrate into something else. Because we have this tension between two NATO countries, Turkey and Greece. And they hate each other. I mean, they make it very obvious. This is not like, they don't talk to each other in a way that diplomatic countries do, like countries that hate each other but they want to be diplomatic at the same time. Like they make it very obvious. They make it very, very obvious. They make it very conspicuous. If I can use a different word for the same thing, just to sound smart, it's conspicuous. They make it very obvious, and the Turks come out and they say, you have all, Greece, yelled at them, you have no history, right? You have no history. We are the true owners of Adrianople. And I can totally see why the Turks fought for that region, Adrianople, because by taking that region, the Turks, they are now bordering with Greece. And Joseph Lieberman, because right now Turkey is kind of acting like a thorn in the flesh of NATO. Because Biden, the American government, wants Sweden and Finland to join NATO. And the Russians are saying, don't do it. And the Finns and the Swedes are saying, we want to join NATO. But the thing with NATO, the way it works is that all the countries have to unanimously agree to accept a new member. And Turkey says, no, we don't want Finland. We don't want Sweden. Because Sweden caters to the PKK, which is a Kurdish terrorist organization. And I'm no fan of the Kurds, right? In a way I can sympathize with the position of Turkey when it comes to these terrorists, because the Kurds aren't really the most friendly people. The Kurds living in Iraq, they can be very racist, they can be very anti-Christian. They're not the friendliest of people. So I'm not like a lot of Americans come out and they're like, oh, the Kurds, and I'm just like, no, I'm not too credulous when it comes to the Kurds. But Turkey says, hey, Sweden holds to caters to the PKK. And then also the United States said, okay, Turkey, you can't buy our fighter jets because you got this missile system from Russia. It's called an S-400, I think. And America told Turkey not to buy them, but Turkey did it anyway because Turkey's going rogue. And this is really a sign. Like, Germany got the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, although it's not operational right now. But nonetheless, Germany built, alongside with Russia, Germany built a pipeline connecting Russia with Germany so that Germany could get gas directly from the Russians. And this was against the request from the U.S. not to do this, and Germany did it anyway. So what's happening in NATO? What's happening is that you have countries that are beginning to go rogue. And we've been seeing this for years. Countries ignoring the demands of the U.S. And even with this war in Ukraine, there's a war going on. Do I have to tell you there's a war going on, right? I'm stating the obvious, but with this whole war in Ukraine, NATO, I think, is using this war as a way to rally up the countries, its NATO countries around it, so that NATO could further show that it has a reason to exist. Like, we have to exist. Look, Russia's on the war path. Russian imperialism is continuing on. It's intensifying. So NATO has to exist. So I think NATO's using this conflict for that end. But regardless of this war, there are still countries in NATO that really don't care so much about listening to the United States. And we see this with Turkey. And Joseph Lieberman, who he was a Democrat senator, I think he went to becoming an independent or something. I don't like him. He's an asshole. But Joseph Lieberman wrote an article recently saying that we should just boot Turkey out of NATO. And I read about this today, and I just started laughing when I read it, because it's like, that's never going to happen. NATO is never going to boot Turkey out of its alliance. If anything, Turkey will just leave NATO once it doesn't need NATO anymore for some reason or another in the future. Because Turkey is in a very, very special position, geopolitically speaking. Turkey is right on that transition point between Asia and Europe. And so it's a buffer. That's what it is. It's a buffer zone. Turkey is a buffer between Asia and Europe. And so if Russia decided to invade Europe, America would count on Turkey to act as a defense, as basically a giant fortification against Russian expansionism. And Turkey's right on the Black Sea. And so NATO could use Turkey to block Russia on the Black Sea. It's all very, geostrategic to sound like some academic. So there's no way that NATO is going to boot Turkey out. And I think Joseph Lieberman knows this. I mean, he's old enough to know all this stuff. And I think he just writes things to appeal to his soft conservative base. Let's say Turkey and Greece go to war with each other. I mean, this would be the first time that NATO would go to war with itself. NATO would be going to war with itself at this point. It would be like an autoimmune disease in the body politic. And it's like, what would happen? I mean, it would delegitimize NATO, because then Russia would come along and say, look, NATO fighting against self. They can't even keep it together themselves. And there you would have Turkey and Greece fighting each other. It's like, what's NATO going to do? What side are they going to pick? What side are they going to pick? Maybe they'll make money on both sides and sell weapons to both. I don't know. But I think if NATO is going to disintegrate in the future, I think what would end it would be a war between Greece and Turkey. That's my opinion, And you have this war going on in Ukraine, and for months we've been hearing about how Russia is losing. They're getting their asses kicked. Look how many tanks are destroyed. Look how many Russian tanks are seen on the side of the road. And it's like, excuse me, who owns a big chunk of Ukraine? Not Ukraine. It's the Russians. And the Russians keep taking territory. They're about to take Severodonetsk. Even the people in the Ukrainian government are saying it's not looking good for us. Zelensky himself said it's not looking good for us. The governor of Luhansk even said it looks like we're going to have to surrender. It's crazy. Most of Donbass is controlled by Russia. And they took Liman, and Russia just recently took Popasna. They took Kherson, and they're talking about making Kherson a member of the Russian Federation. They're talking about integrating the city into the Russian Federation. It's like, who's winning this war? Who? I mean, Zelensky, I shouldn't laugh about this because people are dying, but Zelensky himself is saying that it's very difficult. It's not looking good right now. It's crazy. And NATO is transporting their weapons to Western Ukraine, which means that the Ukrainians are forced to transport all those weapons all the way 1,000 miles to the eastern part of Ukraine, which logistically speaking is exhausting the country. So it's not looking good for Ukraine. So with a rising Russia, with a Russia that is making military advancements, and the Russians are greatly basing their narrative, their justification on history, saying, well, historically Ukraine used to belong to Russia. Turkey in the future can say, well, look, I mean, America is not our best friend right now. They didn't even want to sell us fighter jets because we bought some S-400s. And Turkey could say, look, Russia is taking territory on a historical narrative. I mean, we can do the same, right? Adrianople, Edirne, that was once the Greeks, but we took it from them, and the Greeks are now saying these little islands belong to them. We should take those islands too. I mean, it's like the world is down spiraling into conflict. It's not looking good, everybody. It's not looking good. It's looking very, very ugly. For some reason, I have a good amount of energy in front of the camera. I'm not even reading a script. I had all these notes and everything, and I was just like, throw the notes out. I don't care. I'm just gonna talk. I find that much easier than sitting. Oh, let me look at my notes like I'm some kind of pseudo intellectual. Anyway. You guys just heard some theology. And don't forget, guys, don't forget, Macedonia is Greece, okay? And Alexander the Great was Macedonian. I hope knowing this fact has improved your life exponentially somehow. Anyway, God bless y'all. Be well.